You have the big accountability, and we should be seeing the Secretary of Homeland Security coming in front of the American people, and certainly the Oversight Committee, when we have such existential issues about the deployment of federal force in our country going on. But you are here in her place. And I think, you know, if we rewound the tape to a year and a half ago or a year plus ago, you had a lot of Americans who felt very strongly that if you are here illegally, especially if you were involved in any kind of criminal activity, you should be deported, right? You need strong borders. I'm a CIA officer. You need strong borders. We need an immigration policy that allows us to do that, but that enforcement would have been something that the average American supported. But the conduct of ICE in places like Minneapolis has now boomeranged to the point where people say, well, look, I was for enforcement, but I'm not for what looks like authoritarian style, federal goons on our streets. And that's not coming from Democrats. That's coming from, in Michigan, the state of Michigan voted for Donald Trump. You're coming from people who say, look, I'm all for enforcement, but I'm not for trampling basic rights. And Americans have an internal barometer for what looks and smells authoritarian, and whether it's shooting someone who's unarmed or pepper spraying kids or picking people up as they walk into Target and checking their papers, that is an internal barometer that we all have, that you have crossed. And we're here today, and all this firestorm is here, not because of people on the ground, but because of your behavior in ICE. And, I think when you extrapolate out and you listen to what the president and his cabinet are saying, I have to ask about our 2026 elections. Okay, the president says we should federalize our elections, even though the U.S. Constitution was written by our founders to give that power to the states so that we would never have a president who took too much power and tried to become a king. He's tried to get voter rolls, including in my state. He's complained that elections aren't free and fair. In 2020, he came up with a playbook to deploy federal law enforcement around polling places, and the White House spokeswoman will not rule that out as of a month and a half ago. So I have to ask Mr. Lyons, do you believe that ICE has the authority to be deployed to U.S. polling places around the country?
So, ma'am, we're a civil, obviously, we do civil enforcement and criminal law enforcement. There's no reason for us to deploy to a polling facility.
So if the President of the United States gets Kristi Noem on the phone and she gets you on the phone and she says, we've heard there's a problem in Georgia or in Michigan or somewhere else, I need you to go and physically deploy around polling locations, you will say no.
There's no reason for us to deploy, ma'am.
Well, then you should say no, right?
Yes, but just point of clarification. Homeland Security investigations, we do investigate voter fraud, which we've made several arrests, most recently a high-profile one in Massachusetts. So just later on.
That's very different than the physical intimidation.
I just didn't want you to say that we don't do anything with voter. I just want you to know we do that.
That's fine. I'm talking about something that I think would be extraordinary in American history, which is uniformed and masked ICE agents encircling polling places. And it's not fantasy, it's not made up. These are things that the president and his cabinet have suggested. They've suggested invoking the Insurrection Act, which would allow active duty military to do the very same thing. So this isn't, someone who thinks the sky is falling. The president and his cabinet are suggesting. So you're going to be the guy standing in the breach.
There's no reason, like I say, ma'am, there's no reason for you to use ICE officers in that.
Great. Well, I hope that in the privacy of that meeting, when that comes down and the president feels like he's going to lose the midterm elections, that you don't buckle. Because I think our democracy literally is dependent on it. Now, coupled with that, you've heard from a number of my colleagues about labeling people as domestic terrorists. What is the definition of a domestic terrorist?
So, ma'am, domestic terrorist is any organization that, on American soil, on home nation soil, that's involved in acts of treason, acts of violence, active extremism against a group or against a country.
Okay, so actually in law, it's defined by the Patriot Act. That's the clearest place we have it. And it has to be tied to criminal activity,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
So protesting, even if you don't like it, protesting of ICE agents, unarmed and without destroying property, is that a domestic terrorist?
No, ma'am. I stated under oath earlier that that's covered under the First Amendment right.
Great. So when, again, the president and Stephen Miller and others in the cabinet, including your boss, Kristi Noem, label people like Renee Good domestic terrorists, you understand why we can't trust what you're doing with the information you're collecting on these so-called domestic terrorists. So can you tell us under oath, does the Department of Homeland Security maintain a database of any kind of domestic terrorists? Are you collecting facial recognition information, license plates, locations, addresses, those kinds of information?
No, ma'am, and I testified on the oath on Tuesday as well. I said the same thing. We don't have a database. If there is a case, a criminal case, that may involve some type of domestic terrorist organization, Homeland Security, as you know, Homeland Security investigation is involved across the board and embedded with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We do conduct those, but there is no database, ma'am, for that.
Okay, or do you contribute data to anyone else's, any other federal agency's database?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so the fact that we have ICE agents saying out loud to people that they're trying to arrest or engage with that we're going to put you into a database is just erroneous. They're making that up.
Yes, ma'am, I can't speak to why that officer said it, but we do not do that.
Well, I would just offer that given that the president put out an executive order in September and said he wants a list of domestic terrorist groups to use the full weight of the federal government to go against, you can imagine that people who are peaceful protesters feel like they are going to be targeted and feel that they are at risk. So I think the conduct of your agency has put us in a position where the average American doesn't know whether to trust law enforcement, and that is terrible and scary, given what law enforcement on the ground in our states do. And I would just say, if we do not have serious reform and change, then you will be contributing to the average American who woke up very supportive of law enforcement, being terrified that they and their community will be next. Yield back.